Argentinian people say goodbye to the grandmother of Plaza de Mayo, Rosa Roisinblit, at the age of 106 years old, with an enormous work and career as a human rights referent in the country and in the world. In the United States, thousands of people gather in Washington, D.C. to protest against the Trump administration's military occupation of the U.S. Capitol, as well as the systematic harassment of immigrants by Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE). In the Gaza Strip, at least 20,000 children have lost their life at the hands of Israel since October 2023. Hello, welcome to From the South. I am Sophie Fernandez from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Argentinian people say goodbye to the grandmother of Plaza de Mayo, Rosa Roisinblit, at the age of 160 years old, with an enormous work and career as a human rights referent in the country and in the world. Rosa Roisinblit was one of the founders of Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, and central figure in the struggle for the identification of the children kidnapped or born in captivity during the last Argentine civil-military dictatorship. Rosita, as she was also known, was born on August 15, 1919, in Moises village, province of Santa Fe. Her daughter Patricia was one of the 30,000 people kidnapped by the dictatorship that lasted between 1976 and 1982. While Rosa's daughter was never found, the child she birthed in captivity, Guillermo, was found in 2000. The grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo declared Rosa after its honorary president. Also in Argentina, the Ministry of Human Capital acknowledged that the audit Milei's government claimed to have carried out to justify the cessation of food assistance to soup kitchens does not exist. It occurred after a request for access to public information filed by the National Deputy for Buenos Aires, Natalia Sarracho, on May 16, 2024. This request came one day after the head of cabinet, Nicolas Posse, announced in Congress that nearly 50% of the soup kitchens were non-existent, based on an alleged audit. The Ministry of Human Capital admitted that the audit turns out to be non-existent. Claims based on the alleged audit served to suspend the supply of provisions to the soup kitchens, leaving millions of kilos of food undistributed, many on the verge of expiration. Studies by the World Customs Organization showed that Ecuador imports have become key points for exporting cocaine to Europe and the United States. The report detailed that the ports of Guayaquil, Machala, and Posorya are among the 39 areas with the highest drug seizures. In 2023, Guayaquil ranked third in the world for seizure of illicit drugs. Figures reflect how the report supports the financing of the organized crime in the country. Analysis revealed that drug production in Latin America is approximately 4,000 tons, of which Ecuador contributes 1,200 tons and Peru 1,000 tons. More than 55% crosses the Pacific Ocean. Meanwhile, the United States and Ecuador are allegedly working to curb violence and drug trafficking. In other news, in the Dominican Republic, demonstrations were held to reject of U.S. threats to intervene in Venezuela. On Saturday, several political, social, and popular organizations raised their voices in Santo Domingo to support the Venezuelan people and reject the new interferences of Washington. They also accused the Dominican government of acting as a vessel of the United States, with the deployment of ships near the Venezuelan coast. Demonstrators reaffirmed the solidarity with Venezuela and demanded respect for the sovereignty of Latin America and the Caribbean.
To the world and the international organizations of the United Nations and the Security Council and the OAS, that they make prevail the international law of respect for the self-determination of the peoples and the national sovereignty of each one of the nations, the United States and Europe, and no nation, no matter how powerful it may be, should interfere in the internal affairs of any country. Venezuela, like all the nations of the world, has the right to determine what economic and political system it will build. And that is a decision of its people, of its nationals. It is a shame that internationally powerful nations are trying to undermine the sovereignty and self-determination of Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and other nations of the world.
En este caso, de lo que se trata es de que el imperio no puede tolerar que un país.
In this case, the empire cannot tolerate a sovereign country deciding what to do with its own destiny. In the case of Venezuela, what we are talking about is the search for legitimate ways, obviously, to appropriate the natural resources of Venezuela. That is why it is a moral duty to condemn the presence of the United States in the Caribbean. Condemn the military maneuvers in which the Caribbean is involved at this moment, and tell them that if they want to do something good for humanity, they should stop the genocide in Gaza, to solve their internal problems and allow the countries, in this case Venezuela, to decide their destiny in a sovereign manner.
En este caso, Venezuela, su destino de manera.
Now we move to Ethiopia, where the Second Africa CARICOM Summit will be held on Sunday in Addis Ababa, with the aim of strengthening historical, political and economic ties between African countries and members of the Caribbean community. Under the slogan Transcontinental Association in the pursuit of restorative justice for Africans and peoples of African descent through preparations, the meeting seeks to consolidate a common agenda in the face of shared challenges and to promote the South-South cooperation. The Prime Minister of Antigua y Barbuda, the Bahamas, Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, Saint Kitts and Nevis, Barbados and Grenada are already in the Ethiopian capital to participate in the conclave. In addition, the Caribbean diaspora in Ethiopia will host a meeting focused on strengthening cultural and political relations between Africa and the Caribbean. And now we have a short break coming up. But first, remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where we will find news in different formats, news updates and more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In the United States, thousands of people gathered in Washington, D.C. to protest against the Trump administration's military occupation of the U.S. Capitol, as well as the systematic harassment of immigrants orchestrated by Immigration and Customs Enforcement's ICE. Protestants raised their voices against arbitrary arrest, the criminalization of immigration, and the authoritarian policies imposed by the government. They also demanded an end to raids, respect for human rights, and public policies to guarantee employment and decent housing for the most vulnerable sectors. It is worth noting that churches are ringing their bells in support of the protest that is taking place from Malcolm X Park to Liberty Square. In August, U.S. President Donald Trump announced the deployment of federal agents and National Guard troops to confront what he described as a criminal wave. Since then, over 600 arrests have been made, many of them of undocumented people. Meanwhile, social and labor movements in the United States rallied to commemorate Labor Day. Protesters demanded improved working conditions and broader employment opportunities. On Saturday, hundreds of U.S. citizens marched through Manhattan to urge the movement to address the unemployment crisis that has developed in recent months. Participants warned that farmers and construction workers are among the most affected sectors due to the intense immigration rates. They also accused the Trump administration of favoring large companies and disadvantaging the working class. Also in the United States, federal immigration authorities and ICE agents carried out another operation in a chocolate factory in northern New York. State Governor Kathy Hochul denounced that among those detained were parents of at least a dozen children who risked returning home from school to an empty house. The action, described as frightening by the owner of the company, resulted in the detention of between 50 and 60 workers, most of whom were of Latin origin. U.S. President Donald Trump's anti-immigration policy resulted in 14 migrants dead in Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE custody in the first year in office. According to official data, since 2019, 69 migrants died in ICE detention centers. Currently, over 200 detention centers in the United States house 61,000 migrants, nearly double the 37,000 recorded at the start of Trump's second term. 70% of detainees are unsentenced, and many face charges for minor offenses, such as traffic violations. Reports describe overcrowding, lack of access to food, water, and inadequate medical care in detention centers. Despite ICE statements assuring safe, secure, and humane environments, the migrants' death reflects serious flaws in the detention system. And also in the United States, Pentagon officials have described the U.S. attack on a boat in the Caribbean waters of the Venezuelan coast as a crime against civilians. According to the web publication The Intercept, the officials said that the White House paved the way for this operation by dismissing, early this year, the top legal advisors for the Army and the Air Force, thus eliminating critical counterweight to enable the direct targeting of civilians. According to the article, this is part of a pattern where the Pentagon claims to eliminate terrorists while actually killing civilians, as documented in a drone strike in Somalia in 2018. The article also reveals that the designation of the Aragua Train and other criminal groups as terrorists predating this attack created a fictitious legal framework for a military aggression, evidenced by the renewed military encirclement, which includes 4,500 troops, 7 warships, and a nuclear-powered submarine to the Caribbean region. The Ukrainian government announced that thousands of foreign soldiers will be deployed under the pretext of strengthening military defenses in the country's border areas. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that he is formulating a military strategy to deploy a commission of 10,000 troops, aiming to increase the number of soldiers in the national defense line. In this regard, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that he will consider NATO troops on Ukrainian territory to be legitimate targets, and therefore they could be considered an enemy in the conflict. Despite Kiev's provocative actions, Moscow reiterated its willingness to reach a peace agreement with Ukraine. In Vietnam, heavy rainfall has caused severe flooding and the collapse of several houses in Lam Dong province. According to official reports, the emergency teams are helping villagers in the Hiep Tang commune to evacuate risk areas as soon as possible. The floods have affected the main road and 5 villages. At least 500 houses are affected. Some have completely collapsed and others present serious structural damage. The number of flood victims is in the hundreds. More on torrential rains and flooding. In India, authorities have confirmed the death of at least 90 people due to flooding in the areas of Uttarakhand, Punjab, Jammu, Kashmir, and New Delhi. Also, authorities have ordered the evacuation of thousands of citizens who have been transferred to designated safe areas. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, search and rescue operations have concluded following the 6.0 earthquake that struck the country on August 31st, leaving 2,200 dead and 4,000 injured. Authorities emphasized that this was one of the worst tragedies in the country has ever experienced, leaving entire communities destroyed. Among the most affected regions are Kunar, Nuristan, and Laghman, which are facing severe humanitarian crisis. It should be noted that civil protection teams set up for camps for displaced families in several locations, and the organized distribution of primary and emergency humanitarian aid continues. We have a second short break coming up. But before, we invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English. There you'll be able to watch our top stories, special live coverage, and much more. Follow our page and activate the notification button to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break coming, don't go away. In Palestine, the number of people who have died of starvation rises to 382, amid the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip since October 2023. The Gaza Health Department has recorded 6 deaths from starvation and malnutrition in the last 24 hours, including one infant. As a result, the total number of deaths from starvation has reached 382, of which 135 are children. At the same time, Israel has prevented thousands of food products from entering the territory, including vital items such as meat, fish, eggs, fruits and vegetables, as well as certain types of dairy products. The malnutrition caused by the Israeli blockade of the Palestinian coastal enclave currently affects 43,000 children under the age of 5, and more than 55,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women. On the other hand, in the Gaza Strip, at least 20,000 children have lost their life at the hands of Israel since October 2023. In this regard, Palestinian authorities warn that on average, one child has been fatally wounded every hour. It is also estimated that another 132,000 could die of hunger if the airstrikes, ground operations, and the blockade of humanitarian aid imposed by the Israeli army continue. It is important to note that the number of injured Palestinian children has reached 42,000, and that minors compared to adults are 7 times more likely to die from injuries caused by explosions. Meanwhile, in Israel, thousands of people gather in Hostage Square demanding that Benjamin Netanyahu's regime stop the attacks on Gaza and agree with Hamas on the exchange of hostages. Protesters accuse the Israeli Prime Minister of indefinitely prolonging the conflict and the captivity of hostages for political reasons, while clinging to power. Israel citizens fear that the new military authorities in Tel Aviv will wrest the life of the detained family members. Amidst the Zionist aggression that has killed more than 64,000 Palestinian civilians since October 7, 2023. And in the United Kingdom, over 300 people have been arrested during protests in support of the Palestinian people. With Palestinian flags and support banners, participants rejected the escalation of Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip. Under strict security measures, the British police arrested the protesters for considering the protests a violation of the country's anti-terrorism law. This Saturday's demonstrations are part of a series of actions that have taken place in several cities around the world against the advance of the Zionist genocide in Gaza. At the same time, in Chile, social and political organizations demonstrated in front of La Moneda Palace on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The participants demanded that the government end relations with the Zionist State of Israel. In this regard, lawyer Nelson Haddad is conducting a global campaign to collect nearly 100,000 signatures on call for Israel to be expelled from the United Nations. It is important to note that Chile is home to the largest communities of Palestinian descendants outside the Middle East. In other news, the United Nations confirmed that the Rapid Support Forces committed a number of crimes against the humanity during the siege of the Sudanese city of El Fasher. According to a UN report, the armed group committed killings, sexual violence, looting, persecution, and extermination. In addition, the UN report revealed that the Rapid Support Forces and their allies used hunger as a weapon of war by depriving civilians of essential supplies. The investigations were based on more than 200 interviews, statements from survivors of violence, and reports from social organizations. In Greece, a crowd of people gathered outside the parliament building to demand answers from the government about the Tempti train accident, which occurred in 2023. The protest took place in Syntagma Square, 1 week after the investigation judge decided to close the case after over 2 years of investigations. The accident occurred shortly before midnight on February 28, 2023, when a passenger train collided with a freight train on the line between Athens and Thessaloniki, claiming the lives of 57 people. And in China, over 500 representatives from 110 countries of the Global South inaugurated a forum focused on strengthening alliance in the face of a scenario marked by disinformation and fake news. The Forum of Media and Think Tanks of the Global South also marks the formal launch of the network of Joint Communications Association of the Global South, which brings together more than 1,000 media, think tanks and other institutions from 95 nations and regions. This forum becomes a platform to articulate the voices of the South in an international scenario, marked by inequality and the concentration of power in the big media centers. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For telesur English, I'm Sophie Fernandez. Thank you for watching.